The reading lamp in the Enfield library was still warm when Martha Ellington vanished from the Connecticut River town with a population of 11,212. The first Wednesday of October ended with a thick fog blanketing the entire Connecticut River Valley. At 6:40 p.m., the gas station attendant waved through the glass window as the 29-year-old librarian walked past the narrow strip of pavement separating the store and her light blue Chevy Bel Air, carrying a small pack of cigarettes. Martha was carrying out her end-of-day routine, exactly the same as on previous evenings after work at the library, a rhythm the entire town was familiar with. The attendant stood silently watching her figure dissolve into the swirling fog, her brown coat the last splash of color before she disappeared into the darkness along the riverbank road. What happened in the next 90 minutes would haunt Enfield for the following 4 decades. Before diving deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. October 1964, the Enfield, Windsor Locks area along the Connecticut River operated on a steady rhythm, where small roads wound through rows of old wooden houses, schools, churches, and the library all ran on familiar schedules. This was a suburb where people often recognized each other just by their gait, and any delay or deviation in daily routines could easily become a sign of something unusual. In that context, Martha Ellington, 29, an Enfield library employee, began her workday early in the morning with familiar tasks, checking returned books against the catalog, reorganizing index shelves, noting book requests, and briefly discussing new book acquisition plans with colleagues. She was known for having a stable schedule, always leaving the library on time and rarely deviating from her route home. When the clock struck 6:20 p.m., Martha locked the library door, turned off all the lights in the reading room, and crossed the small courtyard to the parking lot, where her light blue Chevy Bel Air sat in its usual spot. No one witnessed anything unusual. She got into the car, started the engine, and left the town center heading toward Windsor Street, a road still busy in the early evening. Around 6:40 p.m., Martha stopped at the gas station near the main intersection, buying a pack of cigarettes and a few small items. The attendant clearly remembered her paying quickly, showing neither haste nor nervousness. This was the last time anyone saw Martha at a confirmed location. By 8:30 p.m., when dinner had gone cold, and Martha still hadn't returned to their home on Maple Avenue, the family's initial casual attention quickly turned to concern. She had no habit of going anywhere after work and had never come home late without letting someone know. Charles Ellington, her husband, checked the home phone and called acquaintances around town one by one, but no one, from friends, colleagues, to neighbors, could confirm seeing Martha since she left the library. With no messages, traces, or reasons to explain her unusual absence, the family realized this was no longer an ordinary delay. At 9:10 p.m., Charles decided to contact the Enfield Police Department to report his wife missing. When the call was transferred to the night shift, the duty officer recorded the information according to the procedure for an adult missing unexpectedly and officially opened case file 64-112. Initial details were collected immediately: the victim's full name, age, height, hair color, last seen clothing, and a description of the light blue Chevy Bel Air she was driving. Charles provided additional details about his wife's commuting habits, her fixed quitting time, and the route she regularly took from the library to home. Police noted this was a short route with little variation, mainly along Windsor Street before turning into the residential area near Maple Avenue. During questioning, the family stated that Martha had a stable schedule, no habit of visiting anyone in the evening, and rarely went far without informing someone. Police asked Charles for a list of people Martha regularly interacted with: library colleagues, a few close friends, some nearby neighbors. From there, they sketched out the closest network of contacts that could help verify information. The duty officer asked about the state of the marriage, any recent tensions, or the possibility that Martha had left voluntarily, but Charles insisted there were no conflicts or unusual changes. Based on the initial description, police assessed the case under 1964 standards. No signs of crime, no evidence of threats or coercion, and the victim was an adult presumed capable of free movement. The case was temporarily classified as a missing person of unknown cause, given priority but not escalated to a criminal investigation. To ensure no important data was overlooked, the night shift established the most logical route Martha had taken. Starting point: the library, last confirmed sighting at the gas station at 6:40 p.m., followed by the stretch of Windsor Street heading south, where traffic cameras of the era were limited and could provide no reference images. Mapping was done manually on paper, with major intersections, vacant lots, riverbank roads, and poorly lit sections circled as priority points. The shift supervisor approved deploying patrol units to sweep the area within a 1 to 2 mile radius of the victim's home and the library, focusing on rarely used side roads at night. 2 patrol cars fanned out north and south along Windsor Street, noting vehicles still on the road, while observing any unusually parked cars and questioning the few people still active late at night. Another unit patrolled along Maple Avenue, checking intersections near the high school and adjacent vacant lots. When the night shift ended, all collected data was quickly compiled, but no clues emerged, indicating Martha's current location or explaining what happened after she left the gas station. File 64-112 remained open and was handed over intact to the morning shift, with instructions to expand the search as soon as it was fully light. As soon as it began to get light, the first morning patrol team took over File 64-112 and began sweeping routes leading to the riverside areas, locations hard to observe in the dark. Around 6 a.m., patrol car E214 moved slowly along River Road, the levee road running parallel to the east bank of the Connecticut River, where vehicles rarely stopped overnight. At a wide curve where the road narrowed and visibility was obscured by a row of birch trees growing close to the levee edge, the officer spotted a light blue car parked off the road's axis, unlike any usual stopping points. Upon closer approach, the license plate matched the information received the night before, the Chevy Bel Air registered to Martha Ellington. The car sat about half a meter from the road edge, facing south, parked crookedly rather than aligned with the lane, suggesting it had been stopped under unusual circumstances. The road surface still held the night's dampness from fog, but no clear skid marks or heavy braking traces were visible. The surrounding area was low grass extending to the levee edge, with no signs of foot traffic overnight, and no other vehicles parked nearby. The patrol unit stopped and approached the vehicle, following standard observation protocol. All doors were closed, no signs of forced entry, the passenger side window slightly ajar, enough to let cold air into the cabin. From outside looking through the glass, the interior showed no obvious disturbance. Items remained in their usual places on the dashboard and driver's seat, but the patrol was not permitted to open the door or seize any objects under initial procedure for an adult missing person. The duty officer noted the key position. The key was not in the ignition and not visible on the floor from the exterior view. A quick check of the fuel gauge showed more than half a tank remaining, ruling out stopping due to running out of gas. No purse or coat was visible on the seats from the windows, and only a folded newspaper lay on the back seat, though it could not be confirmed as belonging to Martha. The patrol continued observing the ground around the car, noting slight depressions in the grass near the driver's door, but due to the night's dew and moisture, the timing or direction of impact could not be determined. No clear footprints, no dropped items outside, and no residual engine warmth sufficient to establish when the vehicle stopped running. Since this stretch of road had poor lighting and was not a place Martha regularly passed or stopped in the evening, the patrol assessed it as an abnormal detail requiring urgent report. The officer immediately contacted command via radio, providing the exact location, vehicle condition, and noting that the vehicle was unoccupied and inconsistent with the victim's described route home per the file. The internal exchange prompted the morning shift commander to temporarily upgrade the case from ordinary missing person to one requiring further scrutiny. They instructed the patrol to preserve the scene, avoid disturbing the vehicle, and expand the observation radius to about 200 meters around the discovery point. While awaiting further instructions, the patrol continued sweeping the area around the car. The levee road in both directions showed almost no signs of other vehicles having stopped overnight. No bottles, personal items, or signs of struggle were found on the ground. The vehicle's position was detailed in the initial report, including approximate coordinates, distance from the car body to the road edge, distance to the levee, and lighting conditions at the scene. All information was relayed to Morning Command Center with a recommendation to reassess the case nature. In summarizing the report, the patrol emphasized that a vehicle owned by a newly reported missing person, appearing driverless, at a location off her daily routine, under mismatched timing and circumstances, exceeded the scope of an ordinary delay. On that basis, File 64-12 was annotated "Suspicious Circumstances," officially elevating the level of concern for Martha Ellington's disappearance before moving into scene processing. Immediately after receiving the report, the morning shift commander dispatched a specialized team to the levee section along the Connecticut River to process the scene according to 1964 procedures. The team brought standard equipment, 35mm film camera, mechanical measuring tape, note forms, and high-power flashlights. Around 7 a.m., they reached the scene as natural light became sufficient for photography, while the ground remained damp from undissipated night fog. Work began with photographing the overall area from multiple angles, along the road axis, from the levee looking inward, and from the road looking out toward the riverside grass. The first photos showed the Chevy Bel Air standing alone on a rarely trafficked stretch, an eerily quiet but clearly abnormal image, though many fine details were limited by the lighting and equipment of the time. After overall shots, the team noted specific vehicle features, front wheel position relative to the road edge, parking angle, and distance from body to grass. Officers measured with mechanical tape, marking on a hand-drawn sketch for the scene report. However, upon surveying the ground surface around the car, they found that any potential footprints or shoe impressions had been completely blurred by the previous night's high humidity. Grass under the driver's door was lightly depressed, but the marks lacked sharpness to identify shoe pattern or direction of movement. This was an inherent limitation of weather conditions and also reflected the unavoidable delay when the car was discovered early morning rather than immediately after stopping. The scene team clearly noted in the report that the hours passed between when the car was abandoned and when police approached directly affected the value of potential physical traces. Another issue was that the area had not been fully secured when the team arrived. During the wait for command orders, a small maintenance truck had passed by, leaving fresh tire tracks on the road and interfering with possible comparison of other tire marks. Although the worker did not get out, the vehicle's presence was recorded in the report as potentially affecting scene evaluation. Since missing person investigation procedures at the time did not require absolute cordoning without clear criminal indicators, police acknowledged the area may have been lightly disturbed before the specialized team arrived, causing many small details to lose their original state. When surveying the interior from outside, they re-observed points the patrol had noted: doors closed, passenger window slightly open, interior without signs of disturbance. As there was no legal basis yet to treat this as a crime scene, and per 1964 regulations on handling personal property in missing person cases, the team did not open the car, collect fingerprints, or process potential evidence inside. Forensic capabilities of the era were very limited. No micro-trace analysis technology, no rapid field testing, and no modern scene mapping tools of later decades. All work relied independently on visual observation, manual notes, and basic photography. After completing the steps per procedure, the team held a brief meeting to assess the scene condition. No clear signs of mechanical failure, no abrupt braking marks, no visual evidence of struggle or forced entry. Though the car appeared in an unusual location, its condition did not provide a definitive conclusion on whether the victim left voluntarily or was affected by external factors. The open window could simply be everyday carelessness, and the crooked parking could occur if the driver stopped briefly in poor light. All these factors forced the scene team to record a cautious conclusion that the possibility of Martha leaving the car against her will could not be ruled out. But there was also insufficient data to confirm coercion or criminal act. The scene report was completed around 8:10 a.m. and forwarded to Command Center with a recommendation to monitor the area during the day to ensure no additional clues were missed, while keeping the vehicle undisturbed until further direction from superiors. After the scene report was completed and sent to Command Center, the team handling File 64-112 began the next step. reconstructing the initial timeline based on all data collected from the previous evening to that morning. The focus was re-establishing Martha Ellington's movements from leaving the library until her Chevy Bel Air was found on the Riverside Levee Road. The first confirmed data point was 6:20 p.m. When Martha left the Enfield library. Multiple staff present at the time agreed on this time frame. The next milestone was 6:40 p.m. at the Windsor Street gas station, corroborated by the clerk's statement, who clearly recalled Martha stopping to buy small items. This was the last point the victim was confirmed seen by an independent witness, making it the primary reference for reconstructing her travel route. According to her daily routine, Martha would take about 10-12 minutes from the gas station to her home on Maple Avenue, with no reasonable cause for her to turn toward the Levee Road leading to the riverbank. Investigators marked 6:55 p.m. as the time Martha should have reached her familiar residential area if she had not changed route. However, finding the car the next morning on River Road raised a series of questions. When did Martha deviate from her usual path, and what caused her to appear on a stretch of road largely unrelated to her daily life? To find answers, officers compared the victim's timeline with statements provided by Charles Ellington. Charles stated he left his Hartford clinic around 6:30 p.m., drove home, and was at home from 7 p.m. onward, waiting for dinner. The time frame he described seemed to align with normal family routine, but investigators noted a noteworthy detail. Travel time from the Hartford clinic to Enfield typically ranged from 20 to 25 minutes, depending on traffic, making his claimed arrival home exactly at 7 p.m., not fully consistent with actual traffic conditions. The period 6:40–7:30 p.m., already identified as a gap in Martha's journey, became more significant when overlapping with the time Charles had no independent witness confirming his location. The investigation team continued analyzing Martha's possible travel from the gas station to the car's discovery location. The route from Windsor Street to River Road required turning off the familiar path and heading into an area with few houses. This route did not match any regular activity per family statements, so the exact moment she left the main road could not be determined by witnesses and could only be inferred from distance and time data. Recalculating distance and travel time, investigators determined Martha must have left the gas station not long after 6:40 p.m. to reach the Riverside area before full darkness, but no witnesses reported seeing her car heading in that direction. During initial statement review, police noted a notable inconsistency in Charles's account. He said he did not know why Martha was late and thought she might have been held up at the library, while library staff confirmed no one returned to the library after Martha left. This inconsistency was not sufficient to establish deception, but was noted in the file as a detail requiring further verification. The investigation team temporarily concluded that the current timeline did not explain the journey from the gas station to the Riverside area, nor the more than 1 hour gap between when Martha was last seen and when the family realized she had not come home. This was a period without witnesses, without verified data, and without information on the victim's actions, making it a critical focal point in determining why the car appeared in an unusual location the next morning. The existence of this time gap was recorded as the most prominent issue in the initial file and viewed as the first marker, indicating that Martha Ellington's disappearance might not simply be an unexplained delay. On the morning of the same day after Martha Ellington's car was found and the initial timeline was reconstructed, the investigation team moved to the next step, collecting statements from individuals who could provide direct information about Martha's state and behavior on the day she disappeared. The first stop was the Enfield Library, where Martha worked and where she was last seen before leaving at 6:20 p.m. The staff on duty that evening confirmed that Martha had completed her tasks as usual, reorganizing bookshelves and checking the borrowing and return catalog before locking up. When asked about Martha's mental state that day, colleague Rebecca said Martha seemed a bit distracted, occasionally glancing out the window or pausing while labeling books. However, Rebecca saw no signs that Martha was being followed or under obvious stress. She described Martha as reserved, usually keeping her emotions private and rarely sharing personal matters. Another staff member recalled that Martha lingered longer than usual at her personal locker, as if checking something again before leaving. But at the time no one thought the detail was significant. Library staff also confirmed that no one else came looking for Martha that afternoon, and there were no unusual calls for her. After fully recording the information from the library, the investigation team moved to the gas station on Windsor Street, where Martha was last seen by an independent witness before vanishing. The duty clerk remembered her appearance quite clearly due to her neat demeanor and calm attitude. Martha bought a pack of cigarettes, paid in cash, and left in under a minute. When asked if Martha had spoken to anyone, looked around as if searching for someone, or appeared confused, the witness affirmed there were no unusual signs. Her behavior matched that of someone heading home after work. However, the witness could not determine the direction the Chevy Bel Air turned when leaving the station, as he only saw the car pull away and merge into the sparse traffic on Windsor Street. The 6:40 p.m. timestamp was confirmed, but Martha's direction of travel after that point remained unclear. The next point on the interview list was a local resident who called the police department early that morning, claiming to have seen a woman who looked like Martha on the Hartford bus line around 7:15 p.m. the previous evening. Investigators verified this because the timing overlapped with the timeline gap, but when gathering more detailed descriptions, the reliability of the statement dropped significantly. The witness only recalled a brown-haired woman in a dark coat and could not identify her face, height, or any other distinguishing features. Moreover, Martha's daily routine had no connection to that bus line, and to reach the reported bus stop at the stated time, she would have had to travel in the complete opposite direction from her route home. The report concluded that this case was unlikely to match, but per procedure it was still recorded in the file as a possibility to rule out. Another interview was conducted with a local delivery driver who said he had seen a car with similar coloring to the Chevy Bel Air heading toward River Road around 7 p.m. However, the driver could not confirm the license plate, and in the dim twilight conditions, even the car's color identification was uncertain. The driver also did not see anyone inside the vehicle and only noticed it because few vehicles traveled toward the Levee Road at that time. This detail was entered into the file but not considered solid evidence due to the lack of clear identifying factors. After compiling all statements gathered from the library, gas station, local residents, and those present along Windsor Street, the investigation team found that the picture of events remained fragmented and lacked connections. Witness information did not rule out the possibility that Martha left the gas station and turned toward the Levee area, but there was also no statement confirming she went in that direction. Witnesses provided inconsistent descriptions. Some said Martha seemed anxious during the workday, others said she was calm at the gas station. One claimed to have seen someone resembling Martha on the bus. Another saw a car resembling hers heading to an area she rarely visited. These data points were insufficient to establish a clear travel route or pinpoint when Martha deviated from the main road. Investigators noted in the report that the current statements provided only scattered pieces, failing to reflect any consistent sequence of actions by the victim during the critical period from 6:40 p.m. until the family realized she had not come home. No witness provided decisive details or established the presence of any threatening element. The analysis showed that while the collected information was abundant, it lacked sufficient precision, forcing the team to conclude that the direction of the investigation could not yet be determined, and the case continued to depend on other verification steps to clarify Martha Ellington's final actions before disappearing. Immediately after compiling the initial witness statements and finding no specific investigative lead, the Enfield Police Department decided to expand the search scale to determine Martha Ellington's possible final location based on the abandoned vehicle on the Levee Road. That afternoon, the department commander mobilized personnel from Enfield PD, coordinated with Windsor Locks PD, and requested additional support from the Connecticut National Guard unit stationed in the Hartford area. A temporary coordination center was set up in the parking lot behind Enfield Police Department headquarters, where a full topographic map was spread out, and team leaders divided areas into search grids. The primary focus was the east bank of the Connecticut River, extending from the vehicle's discovery location to a large bend in the south, where the current was strong and the riverbank eroded seasonally. A team of 6 officers, working with 2 handlers and scent-tracking dogs specialized in missing persons, moved down the Levee Road, and began sweeping sections of grass and riverbank edges. The dogs were allowed to approach the car to pick up the scent, then released to search north and south in sequence. However, due to the many hours that had passed, and the area's exposure to night fog, the scent did not hold long enough, and the dogs only followed a short distance before losing it completely. About 200 meters from the parking spot, the search team encountered small cracks in the ground surface, but could not determine if they were related to the incident or merely natural features caused by groundwater. In the afternoon, a small boat team from Windsor Locks PD patrolled along the water to check nearshore areas where the current was slower and more likely to retain drifting objects. Officers used long poles to probe submerged brush, but found no physical traces or signs of anyone having fallen in. A rudimentary sonar device of the era, capable only of detecting large objects on the riverbed within a limited range, was operated to scan the river bottom, but yielded no anomalies beyond natural rock formations. While the underwater search team worked, onshore forces continued expanding into the Broad Brook Woods, a shaded, densely wooded area less than 2 miles from the riverbank. This area was divided into parallel search lines, each about 20 meters apart, to ensure no traces were missed under the tree canopy. Officers advanced in line formation, systematically checking mounds of earth, hollow tree roots, and any trails that might lead to the river. Some areas had soft soil from rain, making many footprints indistinguishable as to whether they dated from the night of the incident or from locals passing days earlier. This reduced the value of potential signs and forced the team to note only suspicious areas for later review if additional data emerged. At the western edge of Broadbrook Woods, the search team noted a depressed patch of ground with some light scratches, but manual inspection determined it was animal digging, not human excavation. The sweep continued into late afternoon, but recorded no items potentially linked to the victim. In addition to police and National Guard personnel, a team from Bradley International Airport assisted in searching vacant land along the airport's northern perimeter. This was a rarely visited area, mostly open ground and naturally growing brush, occasionally used by airport staff as shortcuts during runway maintenance. The search team checked low-lying sections and drainage ditches, but found no signs of vehicle or foot traffic from the previous evening. Because the airport vicinity often had scattered debris from maintenance activities, the team had to rule out numerous small metal objects, plastic fragments, or common trash to avoid mistaking them for evidence. By the end of the first full day of searching, team leaders compiled reports back to the Field Command Center. All priority areas yielded no reliable leads, no signs of struggle, no personal items, no scattered clothing or victim documents. Levee patrols also confirmed no discarded objects along the roadside or low-grass areas. The water and adjacent wood sweeps showed no deviations from the area's natural condition. Participating officers concluded that although the search scope had been significantly expanded and covered the highest probability zones based on the timeline and vehicle location, no signs indicated the victim had moved through or left traces. This left hypotheses about Martha's path from the gas station to the Levee Road still undetermined, and the case, after a day of large-scale mobilization, was no closer to uncovering the reason for her disappearance. When the first day's search effort extended without any reliable traces found, the investigation team reconvened to evaluate all data and determine whether a specific direction could be formed. 3 main hypotheses were considered: the possibility that Martha left voluntarily, the possibility of an accident causing her to leave the car, and the possibility that she was coerced or forced to leave the vehicle by someone else. The first hypothesis, Martha left voluntarily, was quickly found inconsistent with the data. Her personal routine was stable, with no signs of family conflict, no recorded financial difficulties, or psychological factors described in statements from the library and gas station. Additionally, leaving the car on a deserted stretch of road, far from train stations, bus stops, or residential areas, did not fit the pattern of someone planning to depart. If Martha had chosen to leave home deliberately, she would have had little reason to select a remote spot like the Levee Road, which had no public transportation and posed terrain dangers after dark. All these factors left the voluntary departure hypothesis without clear support. The second hypothesis, an unintentional accident, was analyzed by cross-referencing with the scene condition. If Martha had encountered an unexpected situation requiring her to stop, there would typically be signs of mechanical failure or emergency, such as warning lights on, door open, heavy braking marks, or items left on seats or floor. However, the car was found in completely normal condition, fuel more than half full, no collision damage, no skid marks, and all doors closed. Moreover, the local terrain lacked high cliffs, deep pits, or features that could cause serious injury immediately upon leaving the vehicle. If Martha had fallen or suffered a medical event, the search teams with dogs and line formations would likely have detected ground traces, but results were entirely negative. The absence of evidence or accident signs gradually diminished this hypothesis. The third hypothesis, Martha was coerced or forced to leave the car or enter another vehicle, was discussed more thoroughly because it could explain her disappearance without leaving traces. However, current data did not strongly support this either. If someone had approached Martha's car, the likelihood of leaving shoe prints, secondary tire marks, or minor contact damage was high. But the damp ground showed no clearly distinguishable footprints, and the road surface only had tracks from the maintenance truck that passed after the car was discovered. Additionally, no statements from residents or drivers in the area indicated seeing another vehicle stopped near the Chevy Bel Air that evening. This did not entirely rule out third-party involvement, but the fit between actual data and the hypothesis model remained very low. After analyzing the three main hypotheses, the team summarized the entire search campaign report. The Riverside area showed no signs of anyone falling in. Broadbrook Woods recorded no traces of human movement. Vacant land near Bradley Airport showed no unusual objects or signs. No personal items, clothing, or documents of Martha were found within the search perimeter. Canine reports also provided no specific direction due to scent dilution after many hours. The investigation team concluded that the search scope had fully covered the highest probability areas based on the timeline and vehicle location, but no direct evidence allowed determination of the victim's direction of movement after the car stopped. The complete absence of physical traces, reliable witnesses, and scene evidence left the event analysis at a complete impasse. No investigative direction could be prioritized without falling into speculation. Therefore, the team unanimously assessed that the case still lacked grounds to classify as criminal activity, but it also could not be regarded as purely voluntary departure or simple accident. The final search phase report noted that due to the absence of any verifying evidence, the case could not proceed with active investigation and would depend on supplementary data if it emerged in the following days. In the months following the fruitless search campaign, File 64-912 continued to be reviewed on a periodic basis, but no new information emerged to alter the initial assessment. Investigators successively rechecked priority areas, reviewed weather reports, traffic schedules, and lists of individuals arrested in the region around the time of Martha's disappearance, seeking any connection however small, but no data opened a viable lead. Some new witnesses called the police department in the early weeks of 1965, claiming they might have seen someone resembling Martha in various parts of the state, but all were verified and ruled out, mostly due to timing discrepancies or overly generic descriptions that could not be substantiated. Officers also examined the possibility that Martha had left the state, but no bank transactions, mail, room rentals, or train ticket purchases matched her identifying information. The Chevy Bel Air, after being held in evidence storage for 2 months with no clear signs of crime found, was released back to the family per procedures for unclassified missing person personal property. Throughout the spring of 1965, the investigation team continued reviewing File 64-112, cross-referencing it with other missing person cases in the state, but no behavioral patterns or location coincidences allowed expansion into a related chain of events. Analysis of Martha's personal life, relationships, work, and mental health also yielded no indicators suggesting she might have deliberately left her previous life. The complete absence of physical evidence, verified witnesses, or signs of crime meant the file could only be maintained at a passive observation level. In early June 1965, When all additional review requests produced no new data, the assigned inspector prepared a summary report for submission to command. This report clearly stated that every measure appropriate to the investigative capabilities of the time had been implemented: wide area search, witness interviews, scene analysis, and hypothesis testing. However, all efforts led to the same conclusion: no traces pinpointed the victim's destination or indicated criminal behavior. The report also emphasized that environmental conditions, particularly night fog, high humidity, and riverside terrain, had erased many potential signs in the first few hours, severely reducing the ability to collect evidence. Accompanying this was a note on the technical limitations of 1964 investigative procedures, when scientific forensic methods were still very limited and unable to support expanded scene analysis as in later decades. Upon presentation to command, File 64-112 was placed in the suspended unsolved category per regulations, not fully closed, but no longer actively followed due to no basis for opening any new investigative direction. An internal note was added: the file would only be reactivated if new physical evidence, a highly credible new witness, or some other objective event compelled authorities to re-examine the case. 1965 ended without progress, and Martha Ellington's disappearance officially became one of the town's unsolved files, a case left hanging between incomplete data and unanswered questions, gradually fading into quiet stasis within the investigative system. Nearly 4 decades after File 64-112 was placed in suspended, unsolved status, the riverside area where the Chevy Bel Air had been discovered had changed significantly due to the state's highway infrastructure expansion. By the summer of 2003, the Interstate 91 rehabilitation and widening project entered the phase of deep excavation along the section bordering Windsor Locks to add new lanes. On the morning of July 14th, a crew using an excavator removed old soil layers, exposing utility pipes buried more than 2 meters underground, an area that had seen virtually no human intervention for many decades. During the second scoop, the machine operator felt the bucket strike something hard that produced a distinctly different sound from ordinary soil or rock, forcing him to stop and inspect visually. As the dirt was pushed aside, part of a human skeletal structure, readily identifiable by the curved shape of ribs, emerged right in the middle of the dark soil. The site supervisor immediately ordered all machinery to halt and called the Windsor Locks police. Within 20 minutes, the first officers arrived, established a safety perimeter with crime scene tape, and ordered the workers to leave the excavation area to avoid further disturbing the scene. Recognizing the strong likelihood of human remains, police contacted the Hartford County Forensic Division to dispatch a specialized team for recovery and initial assessment. While awaiting the forensic team, officers observed the surrounding discovery area and recorded the precise geographic location using 2003 positioning equipment, while also measuring the distance from the discovery point to the levee edge that had been searched in 1964. Most strikingly, the body's discovery location was determined to be only about 1.2 kilometers as the crow flies from where Martha Ellington's car had been found, a close enough distance to make the information highly noteworthy. When the forensic team arrived, they began collecting bone fragments piece by piece using specialized tools, taking care not to damage the already heavily decomposed structure. Technicians noted that the bones were buried at a stable depth of about 2 meters, covered by multiple layers of naturally accumulated soil over the decades. Some loose bone fragments lay displaced from the main structure, possibly due to erosion or animal activity in the area. As they cleared soil around the site, the technicians discovered 2 objects near the rib area: a moderately oxidized silver necklace and a large metal key with an old design, typical of styles common in the 1950s, 1960s. Both items were collected with specialized gloves and placed into evidence bags, each assigned an independent evidence number to the technicians. These 2 details could provide critical identifying information, as many long-buried remains can only be identified through personal items associated with the victim. Once all skeletal remains were collected, police expanded the search radius to 10 meters to determine whether any additional evidence had been buried over time. However, aside from a few rusted metal fragments, apparently from old construction equipment, and naturally broken stones, no other objects directly related to the remains were found. The survey team also noted that the terrain had changed dramatically compared to 1964 maps. The site had once been vacant land bordering the levee area, but over time it had been filled and incorporated into the highway project, making direct comparison between current conditions and the old landscape difficult. Nevertheless, when investigators cross-referenced preliminary coordinates with the area searched in 1964, they recognized a significant coincidence. The ground where the remains were found lay right at the western edge of the original expanded search zone, but at a depth that 1960s equipment and methods could not have reached. In other words, the body could have been lying in this location since the time of the disappearance, but it went undetected because there was no reason or capability to dig deeply into the natural soil. The initial scene report noted that the geographic alignment of the remains discovery with the 1964 missing person case provided strong enough grounds to warrant reviewing unsolved files in the county. When checking the cold case list, File 64-912, the disappearance of Martha Ellington stood out as the most prominent match in terms of time and location. That same afternoon, a Hartford County cold case officer was dispatched to the discovery site to personally observe the scene and take custody of the evidence. All remains and recovered items were carefully packaged by forensic technicians, sealed according to protocol, and inventoried separately. A supplemental report was completed on-site, clearly recording the discovery location, stratigraphic features, burial depth, and emphasizing that the point lay within the expanded perimeter of the 1964 search area, but had never been deeply excavated or probed by any means at the time. Based on the strong temporal and geographic correlation, Windsor Locks Police Department submitted an official report to the cold case unit, recommending reactivation of File 64-112 to verify whether the skeleton belonged to the victim missing for nearly 40 years. This was the first time since 1965 that the Martha Ellington case had physical evidence strong enough to potentially change its investigative status. Immediately after sealing was completed, all remains and evidence were transported directly to the Hartford Forensic Laboratory to begin the identification process. There, technicians sorted the skeleton by structural groups to assess preservation levels while recording identifying characteristics such as skull shape, jaw structure, long bone density, and any signs of medical intervention, if present. Although nearly 4 decades of burial had caused significant decomposition or disarticulation of many small bones, the major structures, particularly the jaw and teeth, remained sufficiently intact to allow dental comparison, the foundational method for identifying long-term unidentified remains. In the Hartford County Records Archive, Martha Ellington's dental records from 1963, when she had visited a local dentist, were still preserved in paper form. These included a dental chart, fillings, and distinctive tooth shapes in the upper jaw. When forensic odontologists compared the skeleton's teeth to the old chart, they quickly noted multiple matches, a small gap between the front teeth, a silver filling on the left molar, and surface wear consistent with the dentist's description from that period. The initial comparison indicated a high probability that the skeleton belonged to a woman in her late 20s to early 30s, matching Martha's age at the time of disappearance. However, to fully confirm and rule out rare coincidence, the forensic team proceeded to DNA analysis. Although DNA in the bones had degraded significantly due to time and burial conditions, 2003 extraction techniques still permitted recovery of viable segments from remaining marrow in the femur. This sample was processed and compared to a reference sample provided by Martha's adult daughter, who agreed to supply biological material that same afternoon after police notification. DNA analysis took several days to complete, requiring multiple amplifications of short segments before comparison was possible. When the comparison report was issued, the genetic similarity matched a mother-child relationship, eliminating any doubt of mistaken identity with someone else sharing similar morphological traits. Both methods, dental and DNA, converged on a single conclusion: the skeleton recovered at the construction site was that of Martha Ellington, missing since October 1964. After nearly 40 years, File 64-112 for the first time had verified data to move beyond the ambiguity of an unexplained disappearance. As soon as identity was confirmed, Windsor Locks Police Department sent official notification to the Hartford County Cold Case Unit, requesting reactivation of File 64-112 and reopening the case under Standards for Discovered Remains. A new case file was created, compiling all original documents from 1964, 1965, alongside the 2003 forensic reports, laying the foundation to re-evaluate the full context of Martha's disappearance from the perspective of a case now supported by clear physical evidence. Confirming the remains' identity not only established the link between the new discovery and the long-ago disappearance, but also opened the door to analyzing data previously impossible without scientific grounds, marking the official revival of a file that had been suspended for nearly 4 decades. After the remains were identified as Martha Ellington, the Hartford County Forensic Team conducted a detailed analysis of the burial site to determine the context of death and factors related to decomposition. First, they reconstructed the terrain structure at the discovery location using on-site measurements and soil layers collected during exhumation. The report noted that the body had been buried at a depth of approximately 2 meters below the natural soil surface, a depth far exceeding what could result from environmental action or natural erosion. This indicated the burial was not the product of drifting or sediment accumulation, but a deliberately dug location. Technicians divided soil samples by layer to analyze organic content, grain structure, and compaction levels. Results showed that the soil surrounding the remains had a distinct compaction profile compared to the overlying natural layers, consistent with having been dug up and refilled. This layer also contained significantly lower proportions of plant debris following regular decomposition cycles, indicating a disruption in the stratigraphic structure around 40 years earlier. Based on soil breakdown levels and comparison with Connecticut seasonal cycles, technicians estimated the body had been buried in the late 1960s, aligning with Martha's disappearance in 1964. Analysis also confirmed no signs of post-burial movement, meaning the discovery location was the original placement site. This explained why initial searches found nothing. Although the site was near the searched area, the burial depth exceeded the probing capabilities of 1960s equipment. After stratigraphic analysis, the forensic team shifted to examining the skeleton, particularly the skull, to clarify the cause of death. The skull exhibited a large depressed area on the left parietal region, with radiating fracture lines in a stellate pattern. The degree of depression indicated impact from a concentrated heavy force, most likely from a solid object, with a narrow surface such as a club, small hammer, or similar implement. The fracture pattern and bone breakage ruled out natural fall or minor collision. The depth of the depression only occurs with force sufficient to cause immediately fatal or rapidly fatal brain injury. No other fractures were present on the body, but this did not affect the conclusion, since the skull trauma was sufficient to establish cause of death. Technicians also evaluated the possibility of rare accidental death, such as being struck by a falling object or slipping and hitting a hard surface. However, the 1964 terrain in the area lacked any constructed features or suspended objects capable of delivering equivalent force. Moreover, if Martha had fallen, it would be unlikely for the body to end up buried at such depth without natural disturbance signs. All analyses pointed to the burial occurring immediately after death, before significant decomposition could advance, as joint articulation remained intact until affected by long-term time. This reinforced the assessment that the person who buried the body intended to conceal the death by disposing of the remains shortly after inflicting the fatal injury. When synthesizing all data, burial depth, soil structure, skull trauma, terrain conditions, the forensic team concluded that the cause of death was traumatic brain injury from blunt force impact, not attributable to chance or natural accident. The deep burial in a remote area indicated deliberate concealment carried out shortly after death. Therefore, the official forensic report classified Martha Ellington's death as homicide, shifting the case from an unexplained disappearance to a murder investigation with clear physical evidence appearing for the first time in nearly 40 years. After the forensic report confirmed Martha Ellington's death as homicide and established that the burial location aligned with the area connected to the 1964 disappearance, the Hartford County Cold Case Unit reopened the witness interview process, this time grounded in the new 2003 forensic findings. The objective was to re-examine everyone who had previously provided statements to determine whether any information previously deemed insignificant had become relevant in light of the discovered remains. The investigation team's first stop was the Enfield Library, where staff had interacted with Martha on the day she vanished. Rebecca, who had previously described Martha as distracted before leaving the library, was re-interviewed with focus on behavioral changes or unusual interactions by the victim. When pressed further, Rebecca added that around 5:30 p.m. that day, Martha had opened her personal locker twice, slightly deviating from her usual single opening before heading home. However, Rebecca did not recall Martha showing fear or meeting anyone at the library that day. This information was recorded but did not form a specific lead. Gas station witnesses were also re-questioned, but the duty clerk confirmed that no one approached Martha or displayed surveillance behavior when she left. However, he acknowledged that traffic was light at the time, and he had not fully observed the area outside the store. The team then returned to the list of early case witnesses, including one who had claimed to see a car of similar color to Martha's Bel Air heading toward the Levee Road around 7 p.m. When re-interviewed after nearly 40 years, the person, a now retired delivery driver, said his memory had faded over time, but he still recalled relatively clearly that the car he saw had a license plate beginning with the same two characters as the Ellington family plate, though he had not been certain enough to report it in detail at the time. When investigators showed him a copy of the 1964 plate for verification, he acknowledged that the first character closely matched what he remembered. This statement, though not absolutely precise due to the long passage of time, still reinforced the possibility that Martha's car had been driven toward the area where the remains were later found, rather than simply abandoned randomly. The next step in the interview process was to locate individuals who had reported a strange car near vacant land bordering Windsor Locks in 1964. An elderly woman who had lived near what is now the highway construction zone stated that she had seen a car resembling the Ellingtons' car parked near the edge of the woods one late fall evening in 1964, but at the time she did not consider it important and only mentioned it to a few neighbors. When shown photos of common Chevrolet models from that period, she pointed to the light-colored Bel Air and said it was similar to the one she saw. More importantly, she recalled the car being parked in a spot that today roughly coincides with the remains discovery site, though according to old maps, the area was then only vacant land without deep utility trenches. Though this statement could not pinpoint the exact license plate, it added another link connecting Charles Ellington to the burial area, a connection the investigation had lacked grounds to question in the 1960s. However, the most critical piece emerged when the team located Peter Wyman, an old acquaintance of the Ellington family, who had appeared briefly in the original file, but provided no noteworthy information. When re-questioned about conversations with Charles around the time of Martha's disappearance, Peter recalled a remark he had then dismissed as harmless, complaining, "She won't be a problem soon." Peter said he had assumed Charles was referring to a minor marital disagreement and saw no serious implication. But upon learning that Martha's remains had been found and death ruled due to violent impact, he immediately recognized the statement could carry an entirely different meaning. Peter's statement was entered into the file with high priority because it suggested possible motive or at least negative intent from Charles toward his wife just before her disappearance. When cross-referencing all new statements with the 2003 forensic data, the investigation team saw a chain of connections beginning to form. Martha's car may have been driven toward the remains location. Witnesses reported seeing Charles's car or a similar vehicle nearby. Peter's reported remark from Charles raised questions about personal motive, and the deliberate burial near the car's appearance site supported the hypothesis that the perpetrator had some knowledge of the area. While none of these elements constituted absolute proof, together they carried sufficient weight to designate Charles Ellington as the primary suspect in the reopened investigation. Investigators recorded this conclusion in the end-of-day report and moved to the next step, verifying the degree of alignment between forensic data and Charles's possible actions on October 7, 1964. After determining Charles Ellington as the primary suspect based on supplemental statements and new forensic evidence, the cold case team moved to the pivotal step, reconstructing the complete travel timeline for both Martha and Charles on October 7, 1964, using 2003 technology and analytical methods. First, investigators integrated the forensic data on the burial location into a modern topographic map, then cross-referenced it with 1964 maps reconstructed from archived land records. This allowed them to confirm that the burial site was approximately 1.2 kilometers as the crow flies and about 2.4 kilometers by road at the time from where the car was found, a distance that could be covered in just a few minutes by car. Based on bone decomposition levels and soil layering, forensics estimated that Martha died very close to the time of her disappearance, most likely within the window of 6:50 p.m. to 7:20 p.m. on October 7th. This time frame was described as the plausible time of death, aligning precisely with the unexplained gap in the timeline between Martha leaving the gas station at 6:40 p.m. and the moment Charles reported her missing. To clarify Charles's movements during this window, the team reanalyzed his 1964 statement alongside the new data. Charles had claimed he left his Hartford clinic around 6:30 p.m. and arrived home by 7 p.m. However, according to 1964 traffic data preserved in Connecticut Department of Transportation records and cross-checked against Hartford, Enfield route maps, completing the trip in exactly 30 minutes during rush hour was unlikely. Actual travel times range from 25 to 35 minutes, depending on traffic conditions. This meant Charles may have left the clinic earlier than stated, or not gone straight home as described, opening the possibility that he traveled to the Riverside area during the period overlapping Martha's time of death. The team created a route simulation using 2003 mapping software, incorporating historical data to estimate travel times. They determined that if Charles left the clinic at 6:20 p.m. instead of 6:30 p.m., as claimed, he would have had ample time to reach the Levee Road area before 6:50 p.m., intercept Martha after she left the gas station, and then reach the burial site within 20-30 minutes. Even if he left at 6:30 p.m., appearing in the Levee area around 7 p.m. remained entirely feasible, especially if he did not head directly home as stated. When comparing the original 1964 timeline with the 2003 reconstruction, investigators identified at least 3 inconsistencies. First, Charles's travel time could not be independently verified. Second, the body's location fell within a reasonable travel radius for him during the gap period. Third, new statements indicated Charles or his vehicle was present or appeared near the area at an unspecified time. Additionally, the timeline reconstruction showed no data supporting Martha voluntarily leaving the car or suffering an accident at the remain site. Every point in the timeline required the involvement of a second person to align with the events and burial scene. When the team tested a model of movement for an unidentified suspect, they found no witnesses or evidence supporting the presence of a stranger in the area at the critical time. While data tied to Charles consistently matched case elements, the conclusion was recorded in the report: Charles Ellington lacked a compatible alibi during the forensically determined time of death and was the only individual with the opportunity, potential motive, and necessary access to carry out the actions leading to Martha's death. From that point, the new timeline became the foundation for subsequent investigative steps, solidifying suspicion focused on Charles as the main suspect in a murder case from nearly 40 years earlier. Based on the timeline reconstructed with forensic data and supplemental 2003 statements, the investigation team began developing a complete criminal hypothesis to simulate the entire possible sequence of events on the evening of October 7, 1964. The focus was establishing a unified scenario consistent with time markers, locations, burial traces, and both old and new witness statements. According to this hypothesis, after Martha left the gas station at 6:40 p.m., she continued toward Windsor Street as usual. However, shortly afterward, Charles Ellington, who lacked a verified alibi and may have left his clinic earlier than claimed, appeared on a similar route. An encounter took place on a lightly traveled section, possibly at the intersection of the Levee Road and a side path leading into the wood's edge. where street lighting was limited. Investigators assumed a confrontation occurred here. The conflict may have stemmed from a personal issue hinted at in Peter Wyman's statement, and during the tension, Charles may have used a solid object to deliver a heavy blow to Martha's head, causing the fatal injury consistent with the skull depression documented by forensics. The injury's severity indicated a close-range strike from left to right, consistent with an approach from the driver's side if the two were standing or facing each other near an open car door. After Martha died or became nearly instantly unconscious, Charles likely moved the body into a vehicle to avoid being seen by passers-by. When cross-referenced with witness statements about seeing a car resembling the Ellingtons near the vacant land by the wood's edge, investigators concluded that Charles driving deeper into Broadbrook Woods fit the route perfectly. The scenario continued to be built around the burial depth, approximately 2 meters below natural soil, indicating the perpetrator spent considerable time digging and refilling the grave. This aligned with the period around 7:15–8 p.m., when it was dark, but the area remained quiet enough that a parked vehicle at the wood's edge would go unnoticed. Digging a deep grave in a short time could have been aided by tools available in the car or obtained from nearby construction sites of the era. After burying the body, Charles left the area and drove Martha's Chevy Bel Air to the Levee Road segment, where it was discovered the next morning. Investigators believed abandoning the car in a location well off Martha's normal route was intended to create the impression that she had left the vehicle voluntarily or encountered an unrelated incident. The parking position, not too deep in the woods, not too close to homes, provided just enough ambiguity to make it difficult for 1964 search teams to determine the victim's next direction. This scenario also matched the lack of evidence or footprints around the car, as Charles could have left the scene immediately after staging the abandonment, leaving the cabin and doors in normal condition to avoid drawing attention. When the team compared each step of the hypothesis to forensic data, they found a high degree of consistency. Time of death fit the timeline gap. Charles's feasible travel direction matched the body location, burial depth and soil stratification fit deliberate burial, skull trauma ruled out, accident, and the elderly witness's statement about seeing the Ellington car near the remains site supported the sequence. Even the remark recalled by Peter Wyman, "She won't be a problem soon," aligned with the possibility that Charles had planned, or at least intended, to resolve the conflict violently. The entire cross-referencing process between the criminal hypothesis and forensic facts formed a unified sequence model in which Charles Ellington possessed both latent motive, opportunity to access the victim, and the ability to manipulate the scene in a way that prolonged the disappearance for decades without resolution. The report's conclusion affirmed that the complete criminal hypothesis fit all available data and reinforced the position that Charles was directly involved in Martha Ellington's death. After finalizing the criminal hypothesis and consolidating the chain of evidence showing Charles Ellington's likely direct involvement in Martha's death, the cold case unit decided to summon him for a formal interview under 2003 criminal investigation protocols. Charles, then in his early 70s, was living in a small town north of Connecticut and had no idea that the discovery of the remains and forensic analysis had placed him back at the center of a case long thought forgotten. The interrogation took place at Hartford Police Headquarters in an interview room monitored by audio and video recording equipment to ensure all statements were accurately preserved. Investigators began by asking Charles to recount the full events of October 7, 1964, the day Martha disappeared. Charles repeated content similar to his statement from nearly 40 years earlier. He left the Hartford clinic at 6:30 p.m., arrived home around 7 p.m., flourish, waited for Martha, but she never came, then reported her missing after 9 p.m. However, when this statement was compared to the new forensic data, particularly the time of death window of 6:50, 7:20 p.m., investigators asked Charles to explain why he could not prove his presence at home during the critical period. Charles replied that he remembered it that way, but could provide no corroborating witness. The team then presented each clear inconsistency. First was the travel time issue. 1964. Traffic records showed the route from the clinic to his home was unlikely to be completed in exactly 30 minutes. especially during rush hour. Charles appeared flustered by this information and insisted he didn't pay close attention to the exact time, a stark contrast to his firm assertion in the 1964 statement. Next, investigators presented forensic data on the body's location, only about 1.2 kilometers from where Martha's car was found, and asked if he had ever been in that area that day. He denied it, but this conflicted with the elderly witness's statement about seeing a car resembling the Ellingtons near the wood's edge shortly after Martha's disappearance. Charles responded that a lot of people had similar cars, but investigators pointed out that his family's model had a license plate with two distinctive characters partially matching another re-interviewed witness's recollection. When shifting to analysis of Martha's skull trauma, investigators asked Charles if he recalled any marital conflicts at the time. Charles replied that their marriage was stable, with no major disputes. Immediately, investigators presented Peter Wyman's new statement recounting Charles's suspicious remark. "She won't be a problem soon." Charles strongly denied it, claiming Peter misremembered, but his tense reaction, continuous hand movements, and averted gaze were noted in the behavioral log. The deeper the questioning went, the more inconsistencies Charles displayed. When asked about the evening after Martha left the gas station, Charles stated he never left home during that period. However, the new timeline analysis showed the time of death overlapped with the period he could not prove an alibi for. When questioned about driving to the Levee Road, Charles evaded and requested a break of several minutes, a response noted as an unusual reaction to pressure. After the interview resumed, he continued to deny any involvement, but offered no satisfactory explanation for the inconsistencies in his statements. The team concluded that Charles's 1964 statement did not align with 2003 forensic facts, and his current statement further reinforced the lack of consistency. No evidence proved an alibi during the victim's time of death. Conversely, every analysis pointed to him having opportunity, means, and potential motive. The strategy of confronting statements, combined with behavioral analysis, showed Charles avoiding questions about his whereabouts at key times and displaying clear tension when confronted with witness accounts. At the conclusion of the interview, the cold case team compiled all information, including the 2003 timeline forensic data, new witness statements, and inconsistencies, reinforcing suspicion against Charles, and forwarded the entire file to the Hartford County District Attorney's Office for evaluation and consideration of charges. The investigation file following Charles Ellington's interview was transferred directly to the Hartford County District Attorney's Office, where a team of experienced prosecutors was assigned to review all data, the 2003 forensic reports, the reconstructed timeline from 1964 markers, new witness statements, and inconsistencies in Charles's statements. Prosecutors evaluated each element against evidentiary standards for long cold murder cases, with particular focus on the forensic conclusion that Martha died from blunt force trauma and the body was deliberately buried, consistent with concealment of a crime. They also closely examined the degree of alignment between newly obtained statements, such as the witness who saw a car resembling Charles's near the burial site, and Peter Wyman's account of the suspicious remark, with the complete criminal hypothesis developed by the cold case team. After overall assessment, prosecutors determined the file contained sufficient probable cause to regard Charles Ellington as the primary suspect, and recommended criminal prosecution, especially given his inability to provide a credible alibi during the forensically established time of Martha's death. Next, prosecutors cross-referenced applicable charges under Connecticut law as it stood in 1964. Per regulations, penalties in cases occurring before law reforms must be based on statutes in effect at the time of the offense. After review, they concluded that the three most appropriate charges were murder in the second degree, tampering with evidence, and concealment of a body. Murder in the second degree in 1964 carried a maximum penalty of life imprisonment, depending on the degree of brutality and circumstantial evidence. Tampering with evidence and concealment of a body were additional felonies reinforcing the deliberate nature of concealment. Prosecutors prepared a formal charging recommendation submitted to the county court judge, presenting the full chain of facts, time of death, matching Charles's timeline gap. Body location coinciding with an area where witnesses reported seeing his car, forensic evidence ruling out accident. Inconsistencies in Charles's statements across two periods, nearly 40 years apart, and his abnormal reactions during deep questioning in the interview. The judge reviewed the file in a closed hearing and approved the arrest warrant, citing that the probable cause standard had been met. The warrant was signed that same day and forwarded to Hartford Police Department for execution. Early the next morning, officers arrived at Charles Ellington's home in the town where he resided. Charles was instructed to step outside, informed of the warrant and charges per Miranda procedure, then handcuffed and placed in a patrol car. Neighbors witnessed him being led away in astonishment, as a man who had lived quietly for many years suddenly became the subject of an arrest in a murder case from nearly 40 years earlier. Charles Ellington was transported to Hartford County Jail to await his initial arraignment, marking the transition of the file from investigation to criminal prosecution phase. The trial of Charles Ellington began amid significant local community interest, as this was a case that had remained suspended for nearly 40 years, and was only reopened after the discovery of the remains along with new forensic analyses. The prosecution opened by presenting the forensic report, focusing on Martha Ellington's skull injury, a deep depression in the left parietal region, radiating fractures in a stellate pattern, and bone destruction consistent with a heavy blow from a solid object. A forensic expert was called to testify, explaining that this injury was completely incompatible with a natural accident, and when combined with the body being buried at a depth of 2 meters, the conclusion of death by violent act was undeniable. The prosecution then introduced stratigraphic analysis. Soil samples collected around the remains showed a layer that had been dug up and refilled, with a disruption in the plant decomposition cycle, matching the time of Martha's disappearance in 1964. This was evidence that the body had not been buried by natural erosion, but had been intentionally interred. Following the forensic portion, physical evidence was presented to the court. The silver necklace found near the remains, and the large metal key, with a 1960s style design. Martha's daughter confirmed that the necklace was an item her mother commonly wore. Family album photographs were used to corroborate the identification. The key, according to the prosecution's analysis, matched the lock on Martha's personal locker at the library, adding another layer connecting the remains to the victim's identity. Next, witnesses were called. The elderly woman who had seen a car resembling the Ellingtons parked near the wood's edge in late fall 1964 recounted her memory. Though much time had passed, her testimony supported the possibility that Charles had been present near the burial site. The delivery driver, who had seen a car with a license plate matching the first two characters of Charles's, also provided testimony, admitting that his memory had faded, but still confirming details that caught the jury's attention. Most crucially, Peter Wyman testified, recounting Charles's statement that she won't be a problem soon, indicating signs of marital conflict and the potential for violent motive on Charles's part. In response, the defense focused on challenging the reliability of evidence that had existed for 40 years. They argued that soil samples could have been contaminated by later construction projects in the area, making it difficult to pinpoint the exact time of digging and refilling. Regarding the skull injury, the defense contended that no specific weapon was ever found, rendering any attribution of the means of injury to any individual speculative. They also emphasized that witness recollections after nearly 40 years could not be perfectly accurate and might have been influenced by new information presented before the trial. On motive, the defense argued that there was no direct evidence of serious conflict between Charles and Martha, and the remark recounted by Peter Wyman could have been misinterpreted out of context. When both sides moved into arguments about the timeline, the prosecution stressed that Martha's time of death, from 6:50 to 7:20 p.m., perfectly overlapped with the period in which Charles had no verifiable alibi. They highlighted inconsistencies between his 1964 statement and his 2003 statement, as well as signs of evasion during the interrogation. The defense countered that the timeline lacked direct witnesses and relied solely on forensic inference, which could not be absolutely precise due to the body's long decomposition. However, the prosecution emphasized the overall coherence of the entire chain of evidence, from forensics, witness statements, body location, to the implausibility of accident or voluntary disappearance theories. After 2 days of arguments, the judge instructed the jury to retire to deliberate based on the comprehensive but tightly linked body of circumstantial evidence in the case. As the jury left the courtroom, Charles sat motionless, showing no emotion, while both prosecutors and defense attorneys prepared for a verdict that could resolve the fate of a case suspended for 4 decades. After nearly 8 hours of deliberation, the jury returned to the courtroom with their final decision. When asked by the judge to announce the verdict, the jury foreman stood and stated that, based on all the forensic evidence, witness testimony, and inconsistencies in the defendant's statements, they unanimously found Charles Ellington guilty of murder in the second degree under Connecticut law, as it stood in 1964. The gavel struck to affirm the verdict in the silent courtroom, marking the first time in nearly 40 years that Martha Ellington's death was officially determined to be an intentional homicide with an identified perpetrator. The judge then proceeded to sentencing, considering the penalty framework applicable at the time of the offense. Under 1964 law, murder in the second degree carried a maximum sentence of 30 years imprisonment, and given the nature of the body concealment and the prolonged duration of the case, the judge sentenced Charles Ellington to a term of 25 to 30 years in prison. The defendant, now in his early 70s, merely nodded slightly as the sentence was read, offering no objection or plea for leniency. This verdict also incorporated the additional charges, tampering with evidence and concealment of a body, into the overall sentence without altering the prison term, as murder in the second degree encompassed the primary severity of the conduct. Immediately after the sentence was announced, the Cold Case Unit and Hartford Police Department prepared the official closure of Case File 64-912. A comprehensive summary report was drafted, noting the shortcomings of the initial 1964 investigation, failure to properly secure the scene, technical limitations in forensics, missed opportunities to collect critical traces, and the absence of modern forensic analysis methods. The report also detailed how advancements in 2003 forensic science, particularly DNA analysis, stratigraphic examination, and timeline reconstruction using mapping technology, played a crucial role in solving the case. In addition, police acknowledged the value of re-interviewing witnesses after decades, demonstrating that delayed but consistent memories could produce breakthroughs in cases once thought unsolvable. When the file was archived in Connecticut's Cold Case Solved category, the Martha Ellington case became a testament to an investigative process spanning nearly half a century, in which new technology, the persistence of the Cold Case Unit, and the fortuitous emergence of evidence combined to resurrect a crime buried by time. Authorities noted it as one of the state's longest-running cold cases, resolved through the integration of historical data and modern forensic techniques, closing the long search for answers to Martha Ellington's disappearance and officially restoring a truth that had been buried deep underground for 40 years. The story of the Martha Ellington case, though it began in 1964, reflects a reality that remains strikingly relevant in contemporary American life: the importance of protecting victims, exercising caution in initial investigations, and the value of modern forensic technology in uncovering truth. The fact that police at the time failed to properly cordon off the scene, did not collect traces around the Chevy Bel Air, and overlooked numerous inconsistencies in Charles Ellington's statements, details that later became key clues, illustrates how a small early error can leave a case unresolved for decades. Today, as the United States continues to confront cases of missing persons and domestic violence, the story serves as a reminder that vigilance and early intervention can save lives. Peter Wyman's recollection of the remark, "She won't be a problem soon," which was initially disregarded but later became a pivotal detail, reminds us of community responsibility. If a statement, behavior, or conflict makes you concerned for someone else's safety, report it immediately to law enforcement or support organizations. In the current U.S. context, where victim support programs, domestic violence hotlines, and forensic centers are readily available, timely action by a witness can make a difference. Finally, the advancement of forensic science, from DNA analysis to timeline reconstruction using technology, reminds us that justice may arrive late, but does not disappear. As long as society continues to invest in science, databases, and investigator training. From the Martha Ellington case, the most important lesson is this: truth is only found when people never stop searching for it, and every individual in the community has a role in protecting one another's safety and justice. Thank you for joining me on this nearly 4-decade-long case-solving journey. If you found it valuable, please subscribe so you don't miss the next journeys in search of truth. See you in the next video, where we'll continue exploring mysterious cases and the enduring lessons they leave behind.